In this episode, we take a look at the recent Artemis II mission, as well as the upcoming Artemis missions, and also we'll consider whether the US really has the money to spend on space travel like this. Hello! Welcome to the Call Like I See It podcast. I'm James Keys, and joining me today is a man who, when he gets going, has been known to hit you with some country grammar. Tunde Ogunlana. Tunde, are you ready to show how your takes get hot in here?
Yeah, man. It's like some country fried steak. Let's do it.
All right.
Biscuits and gravy, brother. Let's go.
Meat and potatoes, man. Give people what they need. So, but before we get started, if you enjoy the show, I ask that you subscribe, like the show on YouTube or your podcast app. Doing so really helps the show out. We're recording on April 14th, 2026. And Tunde, a few days ago, the NASA-led Artemis II mission was completed. You know, it ended with a successful splashdown in the Pacific Ocean, not too far off of San Diego. Now, the mission was a pretty spectacular 10-day journey that saw them leave the Earth, fly past the moon and loop back around the moon and then come back to Earth, and then the leaving of the Earth and then coming back to Earth is usually the most perilous parts. But the rest of it, it's a magical journey as far as the things you can see out there. What did you make, though, Tunde, on, about this recently completed mission? And, just the general fact that these guys and lady, the lady went further than anybody had ever gone before into space.
Yeah, I think it was great. I say this, with all the kind of feelings of anxiety and negativity that we have in our nation as a culture, all that, I think it was great. I think it's a positive thing that's happened for us as Americans. And, so my general first take is, I think it was a great event. However, it's kind of sad that with the fracturing of just our media spaces and all that, this isn't something, I feel like when you and I were kids, let's say in the 1980s or prior, this would have been a big national deal, and we would have been all excited and all this about this new milestone. And like you're saying, getting back into space for the first time in over 50 years. And so, that to me is a bit notable that something as drastic and important as this has happened, but it's not really hitting our radar due to understandable other distractions we have as a society. But my initial feeling is that I really think this is great. It's positive. It's good news in a kind of sea of headlines, which have been anxious and kind of negative for our recent period in our culture. So I'm happy to see it. I've got some other comments, but we'll save them for the rest of the discussion.
Yeah, well, and you mean like when you say first time back to space in 50 plus years, it's like deep space, like the distinction there correct. Is like people have been up and down like the space station and, different things like that. But that's like low Earth orbit. That's not really far, and so going to deep space, like where you go out and you're just going, people haven't been doing that for a while. And yes, I think it is to see us. This is the power of collaboration at work, and people need to see the power of collaboration that we can accomplish, because no one person can do something like this. No collection of billionaires, that 2 or 3 guys or whatever can do this. You need a lot of people working together, doing a lot of things in order to pull something like this off. And so I think it's good to reinforce from time to time that, hey, if we work together on things, we can accomplish things that people never dreamed of, or maybe they dreamed of more in a religious context, but we can actually do it, And so the idea of these Artemis missions, and right now they're planning to put somebody on the moon, in the next few years as well. Like this was a test run. There was a previous, Artemis mission, which was, they have this new ship that they're working on, and launch system and all that. They're not doing the stuff like the Apollo stuff from 50 years ago. They got a new thing, so it's cool to see that in action as well. And so to me, it's really it's expanding on, and it's just good. It's expanding on what's possible in absolute terms, and then also what's possible if we work together. So I think that's just a positive reinforcement for society. And I mean, honestly, this is one of those type of things where you shouldn't be, if people get up here and have a bunch of negative things to say about it, that really says more about them, like that says that they want to take a negative mindset and negative approach to whatever's happening, because this is a positive. This is a positive. Like, they went up there, they went further than anybody went, and then they came back safely and a lot, so it's like, well, hey, that's a win. So if somebody, like, sometimes people see the negative in anything. If people are out here making negative about this or wanting to lean into the negative, that's just a person that wants to see the negative in everything. Or conceivably someone who's motivated by the incentives of an algorithm that has given negativity will make it go further. But overall, this is an absolute unequivocal win for humanity, which I cheer for humanity.
Yeah, so now you're gonna make me go negative, so we get more views.
Oh no! I just rolled out a little bit on the negative. People that want to go negative.
But, So then you're gonna ride out on me. So but no, it's interesting. I appreciate the word you used, the term. The power of collaboration. I think that's very important. I think in again, like I said, some of I think our cultural anxiety today as Americans stems from the fact that we don't feel that we're kind of collaborating together as a country. You had a interesting term in our private conversation we had about another topic, and you said democracy is a conversation. And so I'm just giving that example to say, this whole big society, 300 plus million people we have in a country, we do have to collaborate at some level. And I think that you're right. I didn't think of that word, but the word collaboration is very important. And I'll say this, I'm old enough to remember, and you are too, but I won't date you like I never do in our shows.
You always pull me down with you, man.
Yeah. But I'm a crab in a bucket, bro. You ain't getting out. So middle age is real. And so I remember watching the Challenger blow up in my third grade cafeteria. Yeah. Because, they brought the whole school in to lunch. They wheeled a big TV in back when the TVs were like big boxes.
It was supposed to be a good big deal.
Yeah, it was supposed to be a positive event for all of us. And a bunch of us third graders watched the shuttle explode while it was on its way to space. So, that is my memory early in life about what it meant to go to space, that it could be dangerous. And I watched this thing explode and all that. And I think it's a great point you make that, that's a big tragedy. And then we had, I believe it was the Columbia in 2003 explode. So it hasn't been all roses, this space exploration thing. But to your point, the collaboration, the coming together of minds. And I'll say this, the collaboration also internationally. We had specifically the countries of Saudi Arabia, Argentina, South Korea, and Germany had scientific measuring instruments and things on there. And it was a big deal that those countries specifically invested and they put their own scientific stuff in our space shuttle. Space shuttle. In our
You're dating yourself again, man.
Yeah.
Spacecraft.
Yes, thank you, sir. Yeah.
There was a Canadian in there.
It was a machine of some sort, apparently, right?
One of the people in there was a Canadian, so it's also a multinational crew.
You're going to mess up my joke, which I guess I'll just say now, because I was going to joke and say the detractors of this kind of event would tell you that, and I'm surprised we haven't heard it yet, that this was the most woke mission ever, because I realized that we got a gentleman named Wiseman, I think he's Jewish. We had a black astronaut, which apparently, to some people would only be a DEI hire, and that was a handout to shoot someone into space. A woman, which God forbid a woman ever does anything except not be a trad wife. And the last thing, like you said, a Canadian. Oh my God, a socialist. So
oh no, man! I'm concerned about you, man. I think you've been conditioned by these people to hear their arguments and to hear
like
their
knee-jerk reaction
without them even saying anything. You hear them talking.
I know, it's amazing.
Yeah,
but here's what I'll say is that to me was beautiful because it's a reflection of humanity. I'm glad that eclectic group and diverse group of people actually made it the furthest in space. So to me, that is very in a positive, symbolic way. I will say that. So maybe I made up myself for that last 30 seconds.
Well, one thing I wanted to put on this as well, I want to keep us moving, but also I think that it's good. One of the things that I think has been a little bit of a hole in our scientific exploration, at least from a space standpoint, is that I think there's a psychological loss that happens when you're concerned that the people who came before you were more technologically advanced than you are. And so, we've lived this whole time looking back, to 1969 and in the 70s when there's people on the moon, you know what I'm saying? And now, forget about the people that say that was staged. I don't know that they had the tech to stage it back then, and then 69 wasn't the only time, there were several times that they put boots on the ground on the moon. But the last one was in the 70s and they haven't done it since then. So for generations that have been around since then, it's like, well, hold up. Why were they able to do that and we aren't able to do that? Or why is the furthest we've ever been in space in the 1970s? Everybody in the 80s, 90s, and then in the 80s, we blew up a spacecraft with people on board. And it's like, okay, were they, why were they able to accomplish more? So it's not that like you want, I think, as future generations to be able to stand on the shoulders of what came before you. So I think it's a little reassuring. I think back to, like some people have had commentary on Europe after the fall of the Roman Empire. And you got like 1,000 years where people are doing nothing, but they see the ruins of the Roman Empire, which was, like it was immaculate, these aqueducts and all this other stuff. And these guys, carrying buckets from lakes, to try to just farm and that's it. But they could clearly see that a society before them was much more advanced and had things doing much bigger things than they were. So I think it's also good for kind of our psychological benefit here to be like, oh, okay, yeah, we can still do cool stuff. In fact, we can go further than they did, which with, the way science progresses, hopefully that is the way it works, is that we can do more and we can build on what has been done and then do a little bit more, do a little bit better. But everything has a cost though. And we hear all the time, about the United States is running in the red pretty significantly on an annual basis and then has tons and tons of debt. So like, I've just kind of gone out and said how important I think this is, but I still got to ask the question of, do you think this kind of thing is important enough that we spend this kind of money on it? They're saying that, this Artemis program, we're up at like 90 billion. Each launch is 4 billion, but there's a lot that goes into each launch and so forth. Do we have the money to spend on this? These missions cost a lot, and the U.S. government runs annual deficits in the trillions and a total debt that's coming up on 40 trillion. Like, is this a good way for us to spend this money that we spend our grandkids' money?
I don't know. Based on the fact you say we've got already a big deficit, we've already spent our grandkids' money. So
we're great grandkids now.
Let's throw in a little bit more on the credit card and when the register's open. I don't know, man. That's an interesting question. I think that was the same question when I read about what was going on during the first attempts at this in the late 60s through the early 70s, the Apollo missions. The same argument was being had. Remember, we were at the height of the Vietnam War. You had the drama of the late 60s, 1968, a big inflection year in this country with assassinations of famous people like Martin Luther King and Robert F. Kennedy Sr.
Societal upheaval,
Yeah, and so a lot of people were asking these same questions. We have, wars, deficits at the time, all this stuff, recessions. And
let me real quick.
money?
This is great that you said this because I wanted to connect it. It was Harari, the author of *Sapiens*. Remember that brought up democracy as a conversation, and that you had referenced a little bit earlier. And the thing about that is asking the question in a democratic society is correct. People should question this. Like this is the conversation we should have. On okay. How should we be spending this money? How much of this money should we be borrowing? Things like that. So having the conversation, asking the question in itself isn't the problem, and it's good that they did. It's good that we do.
Yeah, no, and I think so. That's why I lead off with, I'm not sure how to answer the question because this is I guess, historic question in modern societies where we've had this Keynesian economics where a government can produce its own money through the fiat currency. So what do we have money for? I'll tell you what I know we have money for because this is something that we're just living through now. Like you said at the beginning of the show, it's April 14th. So since February 28th, we've spent over $250 billion on a war in Iran. That wasn't planned for. That's not something that was part of the budget. That was additional money.
We could do a couple of Artemis programs for that.
That's my point. And that's what I'm saying. And we had $40 billion to give to the nation of Argentina. That wasn't part of the planned budget. We had, we've got money to do these things, obviously, if we have the conviction to do them. That's why, I believe a nation with a $30 trillion GDP has the money to do, universal health care without calling itself socialist. But other people disagree with me. So that's where this is a national conversation. Like you said, if it's $90 billion to send people as far as they've ever been in space, I think, I like the endeavor part of it. I think there's a lot of scientific research and things that'll come out of this that'll probably be good for humanity and society. I do think you're right. Collectively, the collaboration, watching us as a nation do something together with our resources that's positive is very important. I don't know if there's a value on that. So to me, I'd promote continuing to go to space, hypothetically. But I do think it's a great conversation. And I do find it interesting that Americans seem to be very selective about what we have money for and what we don't. And that's, probably a broader conversation that's not part of this discussion, but I think it was a good question.
Yeah, I mean, it's something, it is a conversation that just should be had, though, and should be had. The problem a lot of times is if we don't have the conversation, then people with agendas just make decisions without consulting anyone. And it's like, and then so you end up spending $250 billion in a conflict that you have no clear objective. And in fact, you seem to be backtracking on where you were previously. And it's like, well, hold on. Like, no conversation was had about this. We just spent all this money, and now we're stuck spending a bunch of money to try to even get back to where we were before, And so I think it's two separate questions, though. One question is, do we have the money? And the other question is, how should the money be allocated? How the money that we do have should be allocated. I don't think we have the money. I think the fact that we run deficits in the trillions and can't get a handle on that. It's one thing if that is like part of the plan and we're doing this in a way that we can get a handle on it. We can slow it down if we want to. We can speed it up if we need to, whatever. We're doing this as a matter of course. Just every year, there's no thought of, okay, maybe we should bring it down this year or anything like that, at least in our general political conversation. And so we don't have it, that have the money. Now, some things, even if you don't have the money, are worth extending for. So the question then becomes, with whatever we do have, which is credit, should we be spending this kind of money? And this is where I'm with you on that. I think this is the kind of thing you would extend yourself for. Some of the things I don't think are the kind of things you should extend yourself on, like maybe just, handing money out to other countries, because so help their political leader win an election in Argentina. Like that doesn't seem to be the kind of thing we should spend money on. Hopefully we can have conversations about these things and not just have them done by decree. But if we're going to have a functioning democracy, but I think the bigger question, and this is a question that goes well beyond just the space piece, is what should we be spending money on and what should we not? And like you said, we can doing the space stuff has a lot of benefit from a psychological standpoint on the people of the United States and the people of the world in terms of understanding how people can work together as far as the scientific benefits that can come from it and so forth. And then you just use something you said in particular, the healthcare thing. Spending money on that may be worthwhile in terms of making people more productive in society, eliminating things that kind of, bankruptcies and stuff like that for people because they get sick. Like just being able to do stuff like that. You take that off the table, you might have more people starting businesses and things like that. So those are ways to build the society that maybe those are the kind of things that we look at, okay, maybe we should extend for. But we need to be honest with ourselves about the things we shouldn't be extending for. And if we don't have money just rolling around in, maybe we shouldn't be spending on this or spending on that. And so that, to me, that's the greater conversation. And I worry a lot of times that conversation isn't being had, and that's unfortunate because, as you cited already, from Harari to author Harari, like the democracy is a conversation. So I know we want to wrap, man, but any last thoughts before we close this?
Well, I was just going to say with your comment, I was going to say, God forbid that the American laborer is freed from the yoke of their employer through universal health care, right? How many people stay on the job because they just need their benefits and their health care. So there could be other motivation as to why we don't have that from the moneyed class, but that might be a different show and a different conspiracy theory.
That's definitely a different show.
So here's a couple of things I'll finish off with. One was just the article did mention that one of our motivations is China. That the Chinese have already announced that they want to land people on the moon, a Chinese crew on the moon in 2030. And, reading the article to your point, James, about, we've done this more than one time. 15 human beings have set foot on the moon in human history, and they've all been Americans. So that's one thing that I could see we want to maintain, that this American dominance, clearly there's a chance for us, like we will do if we have the technology to continue this, meaning nation states and empires exploiting the moon for its commercial value, all the minerals and
Yeah. One
metals
of the
and
things
things
I
like
saw,
that.
they're looking at claiming land up there.
Yeah, that's what I mean. So this will become like what humans do, right? Start fighting over this stuff. And then I just thought about the reason I want to bring that up about China is it was the same thing when you look back now as to the early 60s. President Kennedy, the space race. He said he wanted to put a man on the moon for us and science and all that. But the reality now that all this stuff's been declassified was our anxiety about the Soviets because they had put the satellite in space first and Sputnik and all that. So I think it's interesting that this kind of innovation happens due to human competition, which I just find interesting. That's an interesting discussion point. And then the last thing I'll say, again, another quick joke is, because it's interesting, you alluded to the idea that, in Europe, maybe 500 years after the fall of the Roman Empire, you had kind of European peasants growing up doing their farming, and in the backdrop, they would see these aqueducts and these, the Pantheon and these huge, structures. And what's interesting, if you read history, it's kind of like how people do today. They don't assume that the people before them were actually really sophisticated and could have built all this stuff. So back then, a lot of the Europeans assigned that to the gods. And I'm like, no, the gods did this and the god did that, And I was thinking today, it's like ancient aliens. We think that, we want to tell ourselves stories that aliens built the pyramids of the Incas or the pyramids in Egypt. And I just think that, this all is kind of connected in this idea of humans were very curious. We make up stories for things we don't understand, like the examples I just gave, but we also want to continue to explore and look for new things. So I guess maybe that's my way to wrap it up. That's tying a bow from my first comment, which is that's to me why this is special. And to your point about collaboration, that this is big kind of national moment.
Yeah, for sure. So, there's something in there. Just the idea that this is something. Another reason why this may be worth something that we extend for is that the exploration piece is something deep inside us. That's an itch that we need to scratch. And if we don't, then then our imaginations may go really wild as far as all the fantasy stuff, and that sometimes leads to the consequences that we don't want. So, but everything can as well. So I'm not saying this couldn't, but nonetheless, the competition piece also was a good piece. And that's kind of the idea of markets that humans tend to with ordered and structured competition, or markets that don't happen in nature. They have to be created by a government. But when these markets are created, then it spurs humans to strive to find better versions of themselves, at least in that aspect, and why markets need to be protected in the same way that, we're back into space now that China's taking an interest in it. So, competition can spur you to strive. So, so I think we can wrap this part from there. We'll have a second part of our discussion today as well. But subscribe to the podcast, rate it, review it, tell us what you think, send it to a friend. Till next time, I'm James Keys.
I'm Tunde Ogunlana.
All right, we'll talk soon.